I think quite often it is a useful exercise to map and understand what a client's doing, because quite often we find, unless the client is of a certain size and they've already invested in a department that is responsible for customer experience, quite often businesses don't even know their own experience mapped out, let alone what that real world experience is for customers.
Have you done anything with synthetic audiences to try and, I guess, sort of get around that necessity to have customer insight and verbatim sort of first party research, but also the constraints in terms of time and budget?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really, really powerful tool. I wouldn't undermine it by the fact that it's not necessarily the same thing as the traditional approach of speaking to people. And I think there's a lot of research out there from the big agencies, the Gartners and the Forresters and the Deloittes and whatnot, that can feed into crafting those personas. If you take, for example, in the B2B world, it might be that you're looking at a CFO or a CTO, and those audiences are very well documented in terms of what their needs are. And there's lots of kind of good research behind it. And quite often what we can find is using those synthetic audiences gives you a baseline for understanding what they may need. And you can draw hypotheses for that, for your customer experience and for your customer journey mapping and for the development of your messaging and how you go out to channels. But what I think is a really important stage there is that it may be able to do some of the legwork and the lifting that reduces the cost, but there should ideally always be a validation stage where, before you just kind of flow that directly in, can you actually take some of those assertions and hypotheses and test them with real people, just to make sure that whatever you've got in those synthetic audiences hasn't hallucinated or hasn't kind of drawn from something that may not necessarily be true or correct for your market. So really, really important to validate.
I think the other thing that I see, again, it's sort of prerequisite to really understanding the customer journey, but is connecting data across every touch point. And obviously those touch points have exploded now in terms of channels and so on. In most client businesses, that data is very siloed across different channels. And again, a little bit like you described, it can sometimes be in that sort of sprint to get to strategy, it can be quite easy to sort of compromise and say, okay, we won't actually access that data set, or we won't look over here because it's difficult to access. But I think it does only give you a sort of partial view of the true customer behavior.